Welcome friends, welcome to the course of international business. Today we are standing in a very difficult time. So, there has been lot of supply chain disruptions and there have been numerous difficulties due to the recent attack of the coronavirus, the pandemic which has occurred to the world. So, now at this moment the world is seeing a difficult time, right. In the last lecture we were discussing about how companies would market globally their products. So, during that session we discussed about the importance of marketing and how companies would segment on country wise or on product wise, region wise, how they would segment the markets, right. And after that we also discussed about the 4 P's of marketing, like what should be the product when you talk about global markets, what should be the how the pricing should be designed, how the promotion should be made and how the distribution should be done. We had briefly discussed, right, in the last session. So, today we will talk about one of the most important aspects or one of the most important factors that affects the global international business, which is called the global supply chain management. So, today's topic of discussion is global supply chain management. Now, let me start with a small example. I am sure you must have all I think whoever is listening to me, everybody must have heard of the company called Apple, right. So, Apple is one of the most one of the most successful companies in the globe, and today it can be easily said to be successful just because one major reason is its successful supply chain management system, right. So, what exactly is Apple, and let us talk about the case of Apple to start with and let us discuss it. So, as you can see, Apple was founded initially by Steve Jobs, the most popular name if I ever talk of in a business circle, people always talk about Steve Jobs and Apple, right. So, Steve Wozniak and Ronald Wayne in 1976. Apple's strength was designing new products. So, it has been always a very innovative company and it has always come out with a very new product, right, to the market. For example, they came with the iMac, the iPad, iPhone, the Apple Watch, Apple TV and Apple Music. So, these are some of the very profound products of Apple. In 1997, Tim Cook joined Apple, right, and today Tim Cook is the CEO of Apple, and when he joined he is considered to be a supply chain expert. He found that Apple was going through several manufacturing problems, excess of inventory was a problem and which had a drag on the profit and cash flow, right. So, what happened was Cook had to now correct this issue, correct this problem which Apple was facing. So, Cook developed very strong supplier relationship with the Asian companies and outsourced its products from companies like Foxconn, which is one of the largest manufacturers for Apple. But in the process there were several PR issues also. So, during this outsourcing process, many the contract manufacturers used to hard press their workers and there were cases of suicide also which Apple had to face the brunt. But among all this, Apple saw an opportunity also because it saw that the Asian economy was growing and it had a large market, and as well as what was happening is it was there was a high labor, there was a low wage economy, or that means you can say the labor cost was very low in the Asian economies and they were equally skilled also. So, Apple, to take this opportunity, it became the first company to join the Fair Labor Association and it followed all the Chinese labor laws, right. Apple was voted as the leading supply chain worldwide for a number of years between 2010 and 13 by Gartner, right. Apple sells its products through its retail stores, through online stores and a direct sales force too. Now, as of recently, if you see by 2016, the sales from outside US increased from 40% which was in 2006 to 67% in 2016. That you can understand, that means from here how global Apple had become in the recent times. Apple values its sustainability drive, its it has a lot of does a lot of social marketing, it has a lot of shows a lot of concern for the environment. For example, its new products like the MacBook Air and Mac are made from 100% recycled aluminum and does focus on 3 key areas: climate change, resources and smarter chemistry. 100% of its global facilities are powered by renewable energy, with a 70% decrease in average product energy use in 10 years and a 35% reduction in overall carbon footprint in comparison to 2015. In addition, Apple is investing 485 megawatts of renewable energy projects in China to address the upstream supply chain emissions. So, why we started with this example is that Apple has been a very strong an expert in supply chain management, and because of this they have been able to be a successful company, and their profits have been very high, the sales also. Similarly, if you see, there are several such stories. For example, Samsonite, if you talk about Dell, you talk about there are several, Ford example. So, there are several companies, and most of these companies have been successful just because they have been able to manage their supply chain very well, right. So, what is this supply chain all about and why it is important in international business? Supply chain management as defined is the management of the flow of goods and services and includes all processes that transform the raw material into final products, right. It involves the active streamlining of a business supply side activities to maximize the customer's value and gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So, what it says is supply chain management is the process of which where the flow of goods and services, and it includes all the processes that even transforms the raw materials. So, even operations can also be considered to be a part of supply chain, although it is a very debatable thing. Some books would say some things, and that operations is different. But if you understand, supply chain is a holistic approach. It covers everything from the inbound logistics to the transformation of raw materials to the outbound logistics, everything. SCM represents an effort by suppliers to develop and implement supply chains that are as efficient and economical as possible. Very rightly somebody had said that nowadays companies are not competing anymore. In fact, the supply chains of these companies are competing against each other, right. So, the supply chains cover everything from production to product development to the information systems needed to direct those undertakings, everything, right. So, this is how an integrated supply chain and operations model look like. So, if you look at the supply chain management, so this is the supply chain management, right. So, the global supply chain strategy, the entire global supply chain strategy, and this is the logistics and quality management, right. So, what it is saying is this is the improving, this is innovating and impacting, and this is integrating. So, now what it is saying, the arrow is in 2 continuums, is heading towards both directions. So, this is the, if you look at, this is the downstream process, which is the customer relationship. So, when you move downstream, that means you are moving towards the customer, and towards the upstream is the supply management, right, and this is the operations in between. So, downstream is generally if you understand it, downstream and upstream, it is like to understand how to manage the entire value chain, downstream and upstream when we talk about. So, it is like managing the entire value chain. So, this talks about this model, this method talks about how the global supply chain strategy is managed by companies. So, the supply management issues are there, then the operation management and the customer relationship management issues. All 3 of them when handled together, it creates an integrated supply chain and operations model. Okay. How the supply chain management works now? Now, typically if you see, SCM attempts to centrally control or link the production, shipment and distribution of a product, right. Many a times people confuse as if supply chain is only distribution, but that is not correct, right. It is rather a more holistic one, and it is in totality one has to see. By managing the supply chain, companies are able to cut excess cost and deliver products to the consumer faster. So, if, as I said, if today companies are not competing against each other, but the supply chains are competing, and whoever has a very efficient and flexible supply chain or an efficient supply chain, that company would do better than the others in the same maybe in the industry. So, cutting excess cost and delivering products to the consumer faster is the goal of supply chain. So, this is done by keeping tighter control of the internal inventories, internal production, distribution, sales and the inventories of the company's vendors. So, when you talk about supply chain or when we understand about supply chain, please remember that today supply chain management is so interlinked that today the manufacturer and its vendors, they are it is like they work in unison, right. So, the vendor even manages the inventory for the buyer, this the buyer. So, vendor understands when the management, the companies, the producers inventory, what is the level of his inventory and how much it is down, and accordingly he would make his supplies, right. So, SCM is based on the idea that nearly every product, right, that comes to the market results from the efforts of various organizations. So, today as you can see, if you can think of any product that you can talk, right. For example, let us go back to the Apple, an iPhone. Now, if you see an iPhone, it is not that the iPhone is made up of only products from one company. There are several products from several countries involved in making of the iPhone. For example, there are some products from China, there are some products from Taiwan and some from the US itself. So, if you see, there are several organizations involved, and when several organizations are involved, obviously the complexity would be very high, because they are in different time zones, the distances they are far off from each other, and their cultural activities, the cultural behaviors are different. So, how they work and what is the perception of quality, perception of timeliness, so all are different, right. So, in all accordingly, when so much of complexities are there, it becomes very important for the company to integrate and work and take it together, right. Although supply chains have existed for ages, most companies have paid attention in the nearby time, right. So, in SCM, the supply chain manager coordinates the logistics of all aspects of the supply chain, right, which consists of 5 parts. What are the 5 parts? First, the plan or strategy, right. So, what is the plan? What is the strategy or action that is to be taken, right? What are the sources of the raw materials and services, right? They have to coordinate. They first coordinate the plan, then coordinate the source of raw material and services, then coordinate the manufacturing process, which is focused on the productivity and efficiency. Then focus on the delivery and the logistics. Generally, when we talk about logistics, we generally mean the movement of the goods. Logistics, when we talk about logistics, we mean the movement of the goods. So, how would you deliver the products and how would you manage the logistics? How would you keep a control of the logistics, for example? And finally, the return system, or we also term it as the reverse logistics, right. So, the return system for defective or unwanted parts. If suppose there are some products which are broken or something or damaged or something, in that condition they have to be brought it back, right. So, this process is a very costly process, and there also companies have to ensure that it is minimum. So, to ensure it is minimum, first of all your production should not have defects itself. So, first is to minimize your defects, and once if you have some defects, how do you bring it back at a minimum cost. So, this reverse logistics cost has to be decreased also, right. So, now once you understand the supply chain, so at this point of time we can understand that supply chain is an integral or a very complex matter, because every company, whatever they are making, they are using several different components in it. Maybe for example, let us take a large machine. Now, this machine might have 50 products, and these 50 products might be available in different places, right, as I said for Apple. Now, getting the raw material and adjusting it to its production line and assembly, making the assembly and doing everything is a challenge, right. So, supply chain management is become the factor which becomes a decisive factor for companies to be successful or not successful. Now, after this we will talk about the global production and distribution. Now, in today's economy, right, firms must decide few things, like for example, what is the location of the productive activities. So, a company has several productive activities, for example, the sourcing of the raw material, the production, right, itself, and managing the warehouse or material management. So, there are several things which are of importance. Now, so when you are talking about to make a firm profitable or the successful, the firms must decide the location of the productive activities. This is the first thing. Then it should talk about the long term strategic role of foreign production sites. Now, suppose for example, you see today's most of the MNCs, they are producing their products in countries like Taiwan, Philippines, Mexico, India, right, China and all. So, how right is it? For example, during the recent outbreak of the corona, it was seen that too much of dependency on China became a major factor or a major disturbing factor for the companies, because their most of the supplies were now blocked because of the outbreak of corona in Wuhan. Now, so that is a very dangerous thing, because when you have one you have too much of dependency, it could be a strategic failure, right. Then the question is whether to own foreign production activities or outsource those activities. So, that is also what the companies have to look at. Should they maintain it themselves, should they produce it on their own, or they should control it, or they should completely depend on the vendor and believe in the vendor. Which items should be outsourced and which one should be kept with them, right. How to manage a globally dispersed supply chain and what is the role of internet, right, in managing this global logistics. So, today thanks to internet and the growth of online systems, that it has become very efficient and very simple to manage this global supply chain, right. Otherwise, imagine a company making any product which has almost 100 items components, and it is being let us say gathered from 20 different countries or 30 different countries, and there could be multiple vendors also among them. So, if you would not have had the internet backup, right, in such a condition, it would have been nearly impossible, very tough, right. So, that is why no, it is not a very great thing to understand that in the past supply chain efficiency was very poor, right, which has grown significantly and tremendously in today's time, right. Whether to manage global logistics or outsource. So, this is a similar point. So, the companies have to understand this, what they have to do, right. So, should they control the activities by themselves or should they depend on the outside vendors, right. Now, what should be the manufacturing strategy? When you talk about international business is not about only selling, it is about even producing and then selling it at a effective way, in an effective way. So, how is manufacturing going to affect the international business? So, let us see. Success of global operations strategy depends on the compatibility, configuration, coordination and control. So, any global operation strategy will depend on these factors. How compatible is it to use various, let us say, components. So, suppose you are using different machinery, different technology. So, are they compatible? If they are not compatible, maybe the end result might be poor. Then the configuration, right, how is the specification, the configuration, how do you manage it? How do you coordinate this entire process and how do you control them? So, let us see some of them. So, when you talk about compatibility, it is the degree of consistency between the foreign investment decision and the company's competitive strategy. So, low cost or differentiation strategy. For example, a company can have a low cost strategy, a company can have a differentiation strategy, right. So, when you say low cost strategy, that means what? A company produces in huge bulk and then sells it at a low price, right. It destabilizes the market through the help of a low price system. So, for example, most of the Chinese companies have been doing it for the last many years. They have been producing at low cost and supplying it to the world, right. So, and the companies have been even ready to buy almost most of their products from China, right. So, when you talk about this compatibility, what issues come into, let us say, for example, efficiency or cost. Now, cost minimization strategy, offshore manufacturing, high training cost, risk of stockouts and high inventories. So, when you are talking about compatibility, right. So, first point that comes under compatibility is efficiency or cost efficiency, you can say. So, cost minimization becomes one of the core points for any company to be successful. So, for example, if cost minimization is the core idea, then the company may go for offshore manufacturing, that means producing it in some third country, right. But and it could also be subjected to high training cost, because suppose you are producing it in a country like, let us say, Malaysia or let us say Sri Lanka or Bhutan, then maybe the training cost would be very high and there could be a risk of stock out, maybe there could be a quality issue or high inventory issue. So, managing this becomes very important for the companies, right. Second thing is that when you talk about the manufacturing strategy, you need to understand whether how important is this point of dependability. What do you mean by dependability? So, when you are talking about supply chain and you, as I said there is a very complex system, you are getting products from several countries and several vendors. So, there might be a problem, right, that some vendor are not able to deliver it on time or maybe deliver it with the right quality. So, dependability becomes also an important part of the strategy when you talk about global manufacturing system. So, for example, prompt deliveries, availability of components in time, reduce the supply chain length, trust in the quality and price promises. Will the company, will the vendor supply me the price as we had discussed earlier? Will it keep the price, promise the promise? Is its quality trustworthy, right? How do I reduce the supply chain length? Because if I cut down the supply chain length by techniques, for example, like through modular manufacturing processes or through integrated internet online systems. So, we can reduce it, but then how efficiently both the parties are reacting to it. Then is quality, right? Another important part is the quality. So, when I talk about quality, we will talk about the performance reliability, good service, good maintenance. Most of the most important thing when you talk about manufacturing, because in manufacturing, when you talk about manufacturing, you generally talk about the industrial marketing, the big machines and all. So, these processes have to be very highly reliable, because you see there are lots of components in a machine. For example, you talk about a laptop. Now, there are so many components, and if each component just works at even 99% efficiency and there are 10 components. So, the overall reliability of the entire system will go very much down, because 0.99 into 0.99 into 0.9, if you do it 10 times, it will be very less, right. So, and just imagine there are not 10 components in even a computer, there are much more, right. So, sometimes if a small even a reliability issue can at the end become a major problem for any company, right. So, the performance reliability and what is the kind of service being produced or provided by the vendors is a very key question, right. The next is innovation. Now, today everybody is talking about innovation, and innovation has also become a very important part. It was always there, but with today, with the growth of technology and internet systems and all, innovation has become a more discussed and more hot topic, right. So, how do we develop new products and ideas, right? How do we generate new products? Suppose there is a condition in which we do not have time, right. For example, the corona pandemic. How do you innovate a new product which can tackle this problem? So, these are issues where innovation becomes, say, how do you innovate to even survive? For example, many companies lost their businesses. Now, in such a condition, how would they survive? So, what innovation can they do is a very important question, and companies tomorrow would survive if they are innovative, right. If they are not innovative, it becomes very difficult for them to survive. Finally, flexibility, right. The variety of products, right, and how to adjust the product volume. So, how flexible is a company also is very important part of the manufacturing strategy. So, is the company flexible? Does it have sufficient variety of products to attract the customers, and how does it adjust the production volume? Because suppose there are 20 products in the production line the company is manufacturing. Now, for example, there is a company called Avon, right. Avon manufactures cosmetics, and it makes there are number of different products with Avon, right. Now, the question is, how does Avon maintain the volume of production? Because in some countries one product might be in demand and others might not be, some other products, and in a country B, the first product which was in demand in, let us say, country might not be in demand in country B. So, it becomes very difficult to forecast and manage the entire process. So, these are some of the problems that are during manufacturing the company faces. Now, Another point when you talk about the manufacturing strategy is the configuration. Now, what is manufacturing configuration? Now, the question here is how do you configure the entire manufacturing system, right, the process. So, there are few points we will discuss. For example, does the company should the company go for a centralized manufacturing system? Should it go for a regional manufacturing system? Should it go for a multi domestic system? How should it do? How should it coordinate the process and how should it control the process? So, when you talk about let us say centralized manufacturing, okay. So, when you talk about centralized manufacturing, a company might have production in one central place, right, in the home market, and then it would export the products to the other markets, right. Sometimes it goes for a regional manufacturing because centralized manufacturing might not work in some cases because the cost of supply chain might become very high, right, and even the raw material cost might be very high. So, regional manufacturing is a next step where in different regions the company can produce. For example, it can produce in a country which is closer to the home or the largest market, so that it can take advantage of the low cost of wages, maybe the low cost of or the expertise of the skill of the workers, all these things they can take advantage. So, sometimes the companies also go for a regional manufacturing system, right. And then finally, some MNCs go for a multi domestic manufacturing, that means they say they have to be close to the customer. So, it is better to have a local production system. So, if you have a local production system, you can easily keep a track of your customers and accordingly you can be very flexible as to what the customer desires and you can make a change, right. Finally, is to coordinate the entire process and to control the entire process. So, organizations have been doing everything to do all this so that they do well, right, and all these things when somebody does well affects obviously the international business performance. Now, when you talk about IB, international business, another important thing that needs to be discussed is global sourcing. Now, first of all, what is sourcing? Sourcing is the process of making the raw material available, right. So, as I said, an Apple iPhone might be having let us say 20, 30 or 40 components, right. So, all these components are coming from different places and let us say you are getting one product let us say from maybe multiple countries, multiple vendors. So, this becomes a very complex issue, as I said, because of the cultural, time, distance issues, right. So, what is saying, what is global sourcing? Global sourcing refers to the buying of the raw materials or components that go into a company's products from around the world, not just from the headquarters of the country. Example, you see Starbucks buys its coffee from locations like Colombia and Guatemala, right. And this is not all, this is only a small portion of what Starbucks does. So, this is for a company like Starbucks who makes coffee, but what about a company which makes let us say like let us say Caterpillar, who makes an earth moving equipment and where there are large number of components or parts involved in it. The advantages of the global sourcing are quality and lower cost. So, global sourcing is possible to the extent that the world is flat. So, it says that you have to assume that the world is flat. For example, buying the highest quality cocoa beans for making chocolate or buying aluminum from Iceland where it is cheaper because it is made using free geothermal energy. So, as very rightly Jack Welch of GE had said, now it is a boundaryless organization, everything is the systems are boundaryless. So, the world has become like one global market. So, in such a condition we have to see where we can get the raw materials at the cheapest price and the best quality, and if it is available then we have to source it from there in order to make the best product out of it, right. But there are issues, it is not that global sourcing is devoid of issues. There are major issues with associated with the global sourcing. For example, how do you control the quality? So, you cannot have a very significant control, you can have, but it is very difficult, right. How do you build a relationship with the vendors, because there are language barriers, there are cultural differences, there are climate and time differences, and there is a distance issue, right. So, all this makes global sourcing a very tough job, right. So, but whatever it is, today if companies have to survive, if they have to survive in tough times, they cannot ignore global sourcing, because they have to get the best of the product from the maybe the farthest point, but if it is available at a cheaper price, cheaper in the sense the distance travel cost might be high, the transportation cost, but because the production of the some raw material is available cheaply in that particular place, the cost of production is low. So, if you make a trade off, the total value, the total cost might be coming less, although the product is coming from a far off distance. So, all these problems have to be very carefully thought over, and then global sourcing has to be done. So, what I will do is I will wind up here today, and we will continue from here in the next lecture, and we will try to discuss more about the global supply chain management issues and how it affects the international business, right. Thank you very much for the day.